in Figma. So Figma auto layout, anybody can use it, and you can learn how auto layout works by exploring its properties, including resizing, direction, absolute positioning, and more. So we're going to have 4 sections here. One is adding the auto layout, the other is add, edit, and remove objects, then removing the auto layout, and other considerations. So adding the auto layout, you can add the auto layout to a frame or to a selection of objects, and it includes new or empty frames, frames with existing content, components and component sets, and groups or other selections of layers and or objects. So auto layout is only supported on frames. If you select objects that are not in a frame, Figma will create an auto layout frame around them. You can also auto layout to a selected frame, component, or component set from a few different places. One is to use the keyboard shortcut, Shift A. You can also right click in the sidebar next to the plus sign next to the auto layout with a frame selected. You can also right click on a frame or object and add auto layout. And you can add auto layout to components. You will need to add auto layout to each component individually. So learn how to use auto layout in components. We'll skip down to other considerations. Okay, so we'll get to that, I suppose. All right, so that's how you would go about adding it, using the plus sign, the right menu, or Shift A. So adding objects to an auto layout frame. You can add any layer or object to an auto layout frame. Click and drag an object over an auto layout frame. Use the blue indicator to choose where to place the object. So here you can see that an object is being clicked and dragged over an auto layout frame, and there's a blue line that shows up helping us decide where to place that particular object in the auto layout. Note the object size determines if it can be added to the auto layout frame. If any of the object's dimensions are larger than the parent frame, you won't see the option to add it to the auto layout. So the object has to be smaller than the parent frame. Use the modifier key to bypass Figma's default behavior and add larger objects to an auto layout, or to add objects to a nested auto layout. So on a Mac, that would be the Command key. On Windows, that would be the Control key. So if your object is larger, you can use the Command key to override. Okay, so nesting auto layout frames. You can nest an auto layout frame within another auto layout frame to allow you to combine the horizontal and vertical layouts to create more complex interfaces. When you nest an auto layout frame, the nested frame will have both the parent and the child properties. So in our example below, there are 4 levels of auto layout: button, button row, post, and timeline. So here the button you can see. Okay, that's a cool, interesting hover property. Each button is a horizontal auto layout. This allows the button to grow and shrink as we change the label text. Then the button row is, we then add both of the buttons to another horizontal auto layout. This allows objects to respond when we make any changes to a sibling's content. Then we have a post. So here, the first one's the button. Here's the button row. Here is a post. So this is now in a vertical auto layout with the other objects in the post. and it includes the description, the image, and the user profile. So that's the user profile at the top. And then timeline. We've added 3 to a vertical auto layout to create our timeline. The auto layout frame is the top level frame which sits on our canvas. So I suppose here they're showing us newsfeed, and maybe they're just calling the newsfeed as timeline. Okay, so you can nest auto layout frames in a couple of ways. Drag an auto layout frame into an existing auto layout frame, create a new auto layout frame around a selection of auto layout frames and other objects, select the auto layout frame and the other layers you would like to include. Use the keyboard shortcut Shift-A, or Figma will create a frame around your selection and add an auto layout. Okay, you can bypass Figma's default parenting behavior. Hold down the modifier key, Command or Control, depending on Mac or Windows, to keep an object within the current frame or prevent Figma from nesting it. Okay. Duplicating objects. You can duplicate objects to add them to the auto layout. Figma will add the duplicate to the right or below, depending on which horizontal, vertical axis your auto layout is in. So the way you do this is you select a child object in the auto layout frame and you press Command D or Control D. To duplicate, arrange or reorder objects. You can't reorder objects in an instance. You will need to change the object's order in the main component or detach the instance to reorder objects. You can change the order that objects appear in an auto layout frame. This is only supported on main components or auto layout frames outside of a component. So basically you can't reorder something that's nested in. So you can pull it out, reorder it, and then drop it back in, is essentially what we're saying. Or you can also use the modifier key to deep select. So there are a few ways to reorder things. Use the arrow keys on your keyboard, the object to a new position, or you can click and drag the object to a new position. Removing the objects to remove objects from a main component or auto layout frame. You can drag the object outside of the auto layout frame. You can click the toggle the layer visibility. So you can just drag something out from the auto layout frame, or you can toggle the layer visibility, or you can select the object and press delete or backspace to remove the object. You can't delete a layer or object from an instance. If you try, Figma will only toggle the layer's visibility instead of removing it. Toggling a layer or object visibility will hide it from the auto layout frame. If you want to create a gap in where the object should be, you can adjust the opacity of the object instead. So in the right sidebar, update the layer settings to 0%. Okay, so basically you can create a zero opacity object to kind of leave space for the object. Now, removing the auto layout, you can either right click on the frame and select remove auto layout, or you can use the minus sign next to auto layout on the right sidebar, or you can do Shift A but use it with the Option key, or on Windows use it with the Alt key. So note you cannot use the Add Auto Layout keyboard shortcut to remove the auto layout property. Using the shortcut will create a new auto layout frame around your current selection. So you need to use Option Shift A, not just Shift A. Other considerations, prototypes with auto layout. There are a few things to be mindful of when creating prototypes with auto layout. Smart Anime in transitions do not take into account the background of a frame. If you want to use a slide in or move in transition with Smart Anime, you will need to add a background. You can create a rectangle within a regular frame and place your auto layout frame within it. To apply scrolling overflow to a frame, you need to have content to extend beyond the frame's bounds. As an auto layout parent's dimensions are content driven, it will resize to fit the objects. To replicate scrolling overflow, you will need to put the auto layout inside a regular frame. Note, presentation view supports scrolling of long frames by default. You will only need to use this workaround when you want to clip the content. Components and instances. As components are frames, you can add auto layout to them. You will need to add auto layout to each component individually. So remember, this is important. Components are frames, and you can add auto layout to them. And you will need to add that auto layout to each component individually. There isn't currently a way to add auto layout in bulk. So main component and instances actions are adjusting vertical and horizontal padding, adjusting the spacing between, reordering the layers, adding new layers, deleting or removing layers. And you can do any of these things on the main component. You can do everything on the you can do the adjusting vertical and horizontal padding or spacing between on the instance, but you cannot reorder layers or add new layers or delete layers on the instance. Now, if you want to add icons to instances, we recommend adding a placeholder icon with 0% opacity to the main component, and then later you can swap out the icon for another component in your library. So this is all about auto layout and how to use it. So there's another one called Explore Auto Layout Properties, and maybe we'll go through that one in another video. But for now, that's it. I will see you later.